Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome. I feel I should start this session with "I'm Robert and I'm a chemist," but we'll find out more about whether chemists really are anonymous and what we can do to make them less anonymous, hopefully, in the course of the revelation of these results. I'm Robert Parker. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of our research on public attitudes to chemistry. Welcome to the people here in London and to all of those watching online. We know many of our members are watching, and thanks to the web streaming, we have people watching from Hull, from Scotland, and even from the US, so good morning to everybody over there. For those of you who don't know much about the Royal Society of Chemistry, I want to give you just a short overview of who we are and why we've commissioned this research. We are a vibrant community of people who are passionate about chemistry. With over 51,000 members worldwide, we are the UK's professional body for chemical scientists, a not-for-profit organisation with over 170 years of history. We're the oldest surviving chemical society in the world, and we want to be a leading voice for chemistry and a trusted partner for science and humanity. We have a long tradition of communicating chemistry to the public, and our members are very passionate about this topic. We proudly carry the flag of science and of the scientific method, and, for example, we're a strong advocate for evidence-based policy making. And yet, when we talk about the general public, our theories and strategies have been mainly based on anecdotal evidence. It was critically important for us to research people's knowledge of and interest in engagement with chemistry. For the first time, this study on public attitudes to chemistry provides us with the evidence that we wanted. We hope that this research will help our members and others interested in communicating chemistry to the public to better understand their audiences. It's very exciting to be able to share the results with our community today. I look forward to the discussion we're going to have, and you can send us your comments or questions following the discussion on Twitter and using hashtag #ChemPerceptions. Before we move to the presentation of the findings, I'd like to thank the social research company TNS BMRB. They are hosting us today, and of course they conducted this study on our behalf. I would also like to thank the people here in London today who will help us to coordinate the discussion with the people watching online, especially Mark Peplow, Suze Kundu, Stuart Cantrell and Catherine Matheson. I would also like to thank all of our members who helped with this study, offering their opinions, experience and providing feedback in all stages of the research. So I'll now leave the floor to Emily Fu, Associate Director at TNS BMRB, who will reveal to us really what the UK public think about chemistry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Today I'm really pleased to take you through some of the key findings of this research that we conducted into public attitudes to chemistry, chemists and chemicals. So I've got some good news about some positive views that the public have. But I'm also going to outline some of the challenges and show how some people are not currently as engaged with chemistry as perhaps might be hoped, and that for some people it represents a bit of a void. So to understand where this has come from, we've conducted qualitative workshops with the public around the country and a nationally representative survey of just over 2,000 people. Now, just to provide a bit of context, we also spoke to some of the chemistry community and looked at the existing literature into what we thought the expectations were around public opinion of chemistry. And what we found is got a bit of a freeze here. But what we really found was that there was a strong sense of a discrepancy between how chemists saw themselves and as creative people, as really passionate professionals, as Robert just mentioned, and how they thought the public saw them. So as real stereotypes, the white coat male, potentially with not very interesting jobs. So Thanks. And so there's an expectation also that people saw chemistry itself as dangerous, as difficult, associated with really negative industries and pollution. And in relation to chemicals, here we go. Aha. And in relation to chemicals, so there was quite a strong view from some of the chemists that we spoke to that the public really didn't understand chemicals and that they all suffered from something termed chemophobia, so the irrational fear of chemicals. So certainly we found an expectation of some levels of negativity. What our research found was that negativity isn't there. And people were really broadly positive about chemistry and the impact of chemistry. So agreeing that the benefits of chemistry outweigh any harmful effects, with 72% of people saying that chemistry research and development make a direct economic contribution to the UK. People also said that they saw chemistry as having a positive impact on well-being. So we see here 75% of people agreed it had a positive impact, and you can see it compared against some other sciences and other disciplines, and it fares quite well. Chemistry is also seen as part of the solution rather than the problem in relation to various issues. So here, for example, it's seen as part of the solution to finding access to clean, safe water or finding sustainable sources of energy. So far we see that the public has a positive view about chemistry's impacts on society, and they're really overall supportive of that. But when we start asking people about chemistry in and of itself, rather than this positivity, what we found is much more ambivalence. And we found that people really struggled to get to grips with chemistry in terms of understanding what it did, and expressed quite a bit of distance, feeling distant from it. So here, when we asked how people feel about chemistry, what we find is that people express a lot of neutrality. And we see that this neutrality is reflected here in people's level of interest and engagement with chemistry. So what we see is fairly flat distribution. The average level of engagement about 4.3, but significantly we've got 25%, or 1 in 4 people choosing right at the bottom end of the scale. So they're not saying they're not at all interested, not at all engaged with chemistry. So what's driving this sort of disengagement? What's driving this neutrality? So we spent some time talking to people about what their sort of free associations, their top-of-mind associations were with chemistry. And whilst we don't see some of the negative things that maybe were expected, so for example, what I mentioned earlier about polluting industries, what we do see is very narrow responses. So they're mainly around school and around teachers. And the other things that we see are just fairly generic and quite vague and quite narrow. And what we're seeing here really is a void of associations. And this is a void that's being very easily filled with stereotypes. And just to illustrate this, I'm going to read one of the quotes from the qualitative workshops. So I don't feel anything about chemistry because I don't know the sorts of things that they do. So people don't have associations because they just can't imagine what chemists do, or they just don't know. And another quote here. So, I never enjoyed chemistry at school. I don't have much of an opinion about it. So what does this tell us, and how are we supposed to interpret this? We know lots of people have had negative school experiences with chemistry and that they've been put off by it. And we know from the qualitative work that we did that in some cases those negative experiences really translate into a sense of inferiority and feeling a bit stupid. And this is quite a common thing to hear from people. And the survey really reflects this with quite a lot of people saying that they don't feel confident even to have a conversation about chemistry. And we see this as really pronounced amongst women. Another potential reason behind low engagement with chemistry could be that people encounter chemistry relatively infrequently, and that when they do encounter chemistry, it's in a quite shallow way. So the majority of people said that they only hear or see things about chemistry on TV, and that's mainly the TV news, what they describe as the stock footage on the BBC, where you see a man in a white coat next to lots of Petri dishes, and it's the same every time. 14% of people said that they don't hear or see anything about chemistry at all from anywhere, so just a very limited exposure. And one other thing that was interesting was that people didn't necessarily recognize chemists as chemists when they saw them. So when we showed people videos of different industries and different chemists doing different things, they said, that's not a chemist, that's a mechanical engineer, or they listed the specific industry that they saw them working in and said, that's what they are. So whilst they might be seeing chemistry much more often than they think, they're not necessarily recognizing it as that or calling it that. So I just touched on public perceptions of chemists specifically, so let's have a bit more of a look into how people view chemists. Overall, the picture is quite positive. You might say overwhelmingly positive attributes that we have here. So chemists are seen to make a difference in the world as honest, approachable, enthusiastic, all very encouraging. However, whilst people are extremely positive about chemists, they also really strongly associate them with pharmacists. And when we asked people where chemists might work, 76% of people said pharmacies. That's the top result. And 31% of people said only pharmacies or hospitals. So showing that that is really a really strong connection for some people who can't really imagine chemists, or don't imagine currently chemists working in any other industry or any other setting. Okay, so finally, I'm going to talk about chemicals. So we found that members of the public aren't necessarily using the word chemicals in the same way as scientists do. So for the public, chemicals is used to refer to a certain group of chemicals or a subset of chemicals, and included in this group are synthetic chemicals, toxic chemicals, or potentially harmful chemicals that they don't know about. And people don't necessarily feel very informed about these chemicals. They don't know very much about what the long-term impacts on health are, how they're regulated, what they're in. So we did surface some concerns about this type of chemical. But people's overall understanding of chemicals was quite nuanced, and they saw them as having a lot of positive attributes as well as some of the more negative ones. So whilst people talk about chemicals as being those potentially harmful, scary ones, they also know at the same time that all things are made of chemical elements, for example, or that water and oxygen can be toxic at a certain dose. They know not all chemicals are man-made or all dangerous and harmful. And on balance, people had a fairly neutral attitude towards chemicals. So they weren't really worried about them. And yes, they might have some concerns about certain types, and that's how you might hear people talking about them day to day. It wasn't really a pressing concern for many people. Having said that, putting that to one side, one of the really key findings for us about attitudes to chemicals was that they really didn't impact on people's views of chemistry or chemists. People weren't really making that connection. And we found in the survey that even those people who were most suspicious and most negative about chemicals actually felt pretty positive about chemistry and chemists. So maybe contrary to expectations, they're not sort of directly related for people. So trying to change views about chemicals isn't necessarily going to have an effect on people's attitudes to chemistry. So just to summarise, overall, there is a lot of positivity about the impacts of chemistry. People do believe it's a force for good. It's involved in things like drug development and finding cures for cancer. And the people that do it are believed to be honest and have integrity, and they're really trusted. But there are some perceptions that perhaps can be challenged. So this idea that chemistry is abstract, people not really knowing what chemistry's place in the world is outside of this drug development pharmaceutical arena. Another challenge is the lack of confidence that some people have who don't really see chemistry as necessarily accessible for them. And finally, the association just mentioned that with pharmacists being so strong in the absence of any other sort of concrete ideas of what chemists do and where they work. So I'm going to hand over now to John Edwards and the panel to talk through some of the implications of these findings and how they can be turned into opportunities for communicating with the public about chemistry.
Thank you, Emily. So my name's John Edwards, and I work at the RSC leading the communications team. And I'm proud to call myself a chemist, but as Emily's just said, I should probably explain what I mean by that. And I have a chemistry degree, but I've spent the last 8 years working in communications for the Royal Society of Chemistry. And ever since my first day, I've been learning about communications and how to do it right. And my first day, I had some rather harsh lessons from my first boss, who's sitting on the panel with me, about communicating chemistry in an exciting and accessible way. And since then, I've been learning. It's been fantastic. So communication is a skill, and it's not one necessarily that chemists practice every day. So with this research, I'm really hoping we can help our community to develop that skill so that their passion comes through and they can inspire people with chemistry on a day-to-day basis. So we've learned that there's these 3 distinct attitudes, and with each of those attitudes about chemistry, about chemists, and about chemicals, we have different challenges and different opportunities to improve the way that we as a community talk about chemistry and the way it's received by the general public. So with chemists, as I said, we want to explain not just what you do in the lab, but why you do it and why it makes a difference and why you were drawn to the subject, why you're drawn to that profession. With the chemistry, people don't really have anything to hang it on. There's no hook, so give them one. Tell them what it is that chemistry does in the world that makes a difference, and the things that they have in their daily lives, from cooking or whatever, up all the way to solving those global challenges like sustainable energy, sustainable water. Give them the examples. And then on chemicals, this is one that it will be quite difficult for us as chemists. We have a very specific meaning for this word. But we should try not to worry if the people that we're talking to, our next door neighbour or someone at school, isn't using it in the way that we would use it. Try to look past the word chemicals and think about what the conversation is actually about. What do they mean? What are their real concerns? So across all these 3 attitudes, we've got huge opportunities to be positive. And I think that's the main thing that I've got through the 15 or so months that we've been working on this. The one thing that's coming through is that we can afford to be positive, to focus on telling the inspirational stories and not necessarily get bogged down in trying to correct people or trying to focus on the negatives. There's such an opportunity to fill the void of chemical examples that people have. Fill it with positive stories, fill it with the impact that chemistry has. So I don't want to take up more time because the panel will have lots of interesting things, and I'm sure you'll have lots of interesting questions to ask. So I'll just hand over now. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh dear, not a great start. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. My name is Ben Toombs. I'm the head of qualitative and communications research at TNS BMRB, and I was, I guess, overseeing this piece of work, although, to be fair, Emily and other colleagues did most of it. As John was saying, this has been a really fascinating and rewarding piece of work. It's led to some very interesting insights into the nuances of how the public conceives of chemistry and chemists, and particularly chemicals. It's also suggested that there may be a number of disparities between how chemists expect people to feel and what people actually believe. I hope it's thought-provoking for anyone who has an interest in communicating with people about chemistry and trying to increase engagement. I know it's been thought-provoking for people on our panel, so I'd like to introduce them to you now. So on my right, we have Catherine Matheson, who is Director of Programmes at the British Science Association. And then next, Dr. Suze Kundu, who is a material nanochemist and science presenter and a teaching fellow at Imperial College London. Then we have John Edwards from the RSC, who you've already met. Dr. Stuart Catterall, who is Chief Editor of Nature Chemistry. And then on the end, we have Dr. Mark Pablo, who is a freelance science journalist. And we've got a large number of people in the room, which is great, and hopefully we've got an even larger number of people on Twitter, who are represented by 3 people on the table at the back there. So before I take things out to the floor, I'd just like to ask everybody on the panel to reflect briefly on what Emily has been saying. And if you have one thing that you've latched onto that you felt surprising or people should pay attention to, I'd be really interested to share that with us. Catherine.
Shall I go first then?
Please
Great.
do, yes.
Thank you. So I think I was struck in looking at the results and looking at the findings by how important this kind of work is. There was a lot in the report that reminded me of some of the findings of the Public Attitudes to Science survey that was done most recently last year and several times before that. And the results of those surveys and this one being launched today show that in general scientists, including chemists, are valued and trusted and respected by the public, which is not always a message, I think, that scientists themselves feel is true. And so reports like this are invaluable for reminding scientists that their work is held in high esteem by the public. I think reports like this are also useful in helping us to see what the public would like to know more about, what they have an appetite to learn about. So there were some interesting findings about kind of global challenges that the public said that they didn't feel they knew enough about and they wanted to know more about. So that kind of thing is very interesting as well. And that correlates well with the findings from the Public Attitudes to Science survey, in which just over half of the people questioned felt that they didn't know enough. They wanted to see more and hear more about science. There's also some interesting pointers about the potential stereotypes and barriers that I think we're facing. So I was particularly surprised by the confusion between chemists and retail pharmacists, even though I myself use the word chemist when I mean retail pharmacist as well. But I just, in my head, they're completely separate. So I think understanding where the public is coming from on issues like that helps us to tailor our communications more effectively. And to understand that it's not a case of the public being necessarily right or wrong about these things, but just that's what their view is, and that should be our starting point when thinking about how to communicate with them. So I think the challenge for us is how to tell really persuasive, relevant, exciting stories about chemistry, chemistry's big achievements, and also its big challenges at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. Suze.
I was actually, going to follow on from that with the passion side of it. There was this sort of thing where it was thrown out that people sort of lack this emotional connection with chemistry, and chemists perhaps. It was interesting that the public actually do see chemists as enthusiastic people, as interesting people. I think it was 85% of people saw chemists as being enthusiastic. And yet there is that emotional sort of disconnect with the subject. I think, again, sort of building on what Catherine said, if we play on the relevance of chemistry in people's lives, people find things interesting, food, solving these global challenges, but I think also reminding people perhaps that the chemistry is going on in them all the time, that it's going on all around them, could be a really good way to sort of make it a bit more relevant to people. There's also the fun aspect of it. Chemistry can be used in lots of fun things. I personally do a cocktail chemistry lecture, and it's a great stealth science technique. So perhaps playing on things like that could be a really good way for people to show their own passion in topics that are covered by chemistry, that people don't necessarily associate with chemistry. There was a lot of lack of passion, I thought, maybe because there's this association with school chemistry and how they were taught chemistry. Teaching is really tough, as anybody who has ever tried to teach in a school knows. So I suppose one thing would be to kind of help teachers out, perhaps, and feel confident in being passionate about this topic, because we love it, and people are aware that we love it, but they may not know why we love it. So perhaps that would be a really good starting point, telling people exactly what it is about the subject and the relevance of it in our lives and in solving these grand challenges as well. I was really amazed by the results. I think chemists themselves give themselves a bit of a hard time, but actually the public quite like us, which is nice.
Thanks, Suze. Stuart.
So I'm going to take chemicals. So I think I was very pleasantly surprised that it seems that people have a good awareness and understanding of what chemicals are, and that some chemicals can be good for you and some chemicals maybe not good for you. In the popular press and even in marketing, the word chemical is very much demonized. Things are being sold as 100% chemical free. you never see the word chemical in a good context. And as chemists, as John said, we have to accept that there are just two different meanings of the word chemical. And we should be heartened, though, but even though that in the press, chemical is not seen as a good thing, I think 55% of people in the survey said they were fairly neutral. And there were more people who were, well, the actual ones, more people were happy and excited about chemicals. I know a few chemists like that, than were actually shocked, angry, or sad, although I know some people doing their PhDs are maybe in that line. So I was very heartened to see that the general public do have a good understanding of what chemicals actually are. But we have to be careful as chemists about how we do talk about chemicals, because chemistry and chemicals have a very specific technical language. And even though there are some people out there who like to suggest that if you can't pronounce something, it must be bad for you, that's obviously scaremongering. But if you're not talking the same language as someone you're talking to, they can't engage with you. So chemists must be very careful about how they talk about chemicals and what they do. And it's more about what they do than the long and complicated names that they have. It's the outcomes and the impacts that these things will have, the drugs that will cure you, the things that will help you live a better life. And so part of the results also said that people don't feel confident in talking about chemistry, and I think that's wise, because we have this very almost arcane language, and a lot of it is very visual. We draw structures of chemicals that it's almost like a secret language that only chemists know. So we must be very careful, I think, when we're communicating about chemicals to people who aren't chemists. But I was very heartened, as I say, by people actually had a very good understanding of the good and the bad side of chemicals.
Thanks, Stuart. And Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Pablo. What really jumped out at me from this research is the striking mismatch between public attitudes to chemistry and chemists' expectations of those attitudes. One of the stats is that 84% of public agreed that chemists made a valuable contribution to society. Only 12% of chemists in the survey thought the public would have said so. So now it's important not to tar chemists all with the same brush, but it does seem that quite a few of them have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They believe they're unappreciated, that they're mistrusted, and that, as we've heard, an ignorant public is gripped by this chemophobia and an irrational fear of all things chemical. Now, I think the survey shows that's not the case, and it suggests that some chemists have been fighting the wrong battle. They've been working on the assumption that they need to counteract the vast general public's negative attitude to chemistry, when in fact that negative attitude is restricted to a real minority of people. Most are, as we've heard, neutral. So I think that if chemists want to raise the quality of public debate about chemical technologies, they should focus their energies not necessarily on those reflexively lambasting any modern technology, or indeed the enthusiasts who are already very well served by outreach activities, by skilled chemist communicators like Martin Polikoff, David Smith at University of York, Pete Wallace at Cambridge, science fairs, all of these sorts of things. These are if you like, already preaching to the converted at one end, or you're trying to approach a sort of a very hard-to-shift group of negative attitude people at the other end. Really, more chemists need to go after the neutrals in the middle, the vast majority of people who know almost nothing about the world of chemistry. What those people are interested in, according to the survey, is not really the detail about the molecules. They're certainly not interested in being told that they're stupid for fearing chemicals. They want to hear about the broader global challenges that chemistry can help to tackle: availability of food and water, clean energy, medicines, things like that. The survey even showed probably the best ways to reach them: one-to-one conversations, online engagement, but above all, local and national media. And I think if these recommendations really that are coming out of this evidence can actually be applied by more chemists, I think it will help them as a whole to become better ambassadors for their subject.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone, for your thoughts and comments. It's great to know that there's so much to take out from a piece of research and so much of interest. I'm sure there are many more questions to be asked, so I'd like to give you the opportunity to do that now. So if you have a question to put to our panel or possibly about the research, please do raise your hand. If you'd like to say who you are and who you represent, I'll take a couple of questions at a time and then point them in the right direction. Please. Oh, we have a microphone coming too.
Hi.
Craig Nicholson, Research Fortnight. Could you please just talk briefly a bit about why it matters so much to help the public to understand? I mean, you've talked a lot about what science communicators need to do and making chemists kind of feel better about themselves. But why do we want the public to understand more? Are we talking about, like, so they're happy to fund research or what?
Okay, thanks, Craig. Is there another question? Okay, why don't we kick off with that? John, as a representative of the RSC, shall I put that one to you to start with?
Thanks. And it's a question that we've been asking our community as well, and it's one of the ones that we started with, is to say, why to you, the chemists, and to we, a community, is it important that the public understand? And there's partially an element about broader scientific literacy or understanding, being able to engage with those issues. But there is also an element of the passion of our community, and they really want to enthuse other people in that way that anyone who's passionate about a subject wants to enthuse other people around them. It's sharing that passion, that sort of drive to understand the way the world works and the building blocks to be able to make new technologies, to be able to make life better. So there is partially this sort of hoping to broaden out the debate, as it were, give people the confidence to be able to talk about chemistry in a public context where they might have shied away before, but also it's the natural enthusiasm of our community to want to share that.
Thanks, John. Catherine?
Can I add something to that? Because I think I agree with what John said. I also think there is a broader kind of democratic reason for ensuring that science communication is as effective as it can be. And that's to do with the fact that the majority of research is publicly funded, so we're using taxpayers' money to carry out that research, and therefore the public is a major stakeholder in what research gets done, what the impacts are. Paul Nurse has a nice way of phrasing it. He describes it that the public is giving scientists their license to operate. And I think part of that pact between the public, if we can just lump them all together, and the scientists, if we can lump all them together, part of that pact is that there is effective communication and dialogue between those two sides so that research gets done that's in the public interest and that is what the public want. And I think it's really heartening that the public are saying through this survey that they do want to know more about how chemistry is helping solve big global challenges, for example.
Thanks, Catherine. Any further questions? Sir.
Steve Miller, I'm Professor of Science Communication at University College London. It's a kind of point for comment by the panel. I'm all in favour of telling good stories. I'm a great fan of Michael Faraday, one of the best science communicators that there's ever been. What I would say is that, yes, but you're also going to have to step up to the plate when things go wrong and to have scientists come and explain what it is that's going wrong and how things might be put right and what the various responsibilities are. So I wondered if there was any comment from the panel on that.
It's a weighty question.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that when something goes wrong, a leak, an explosion, something like that, then all too often, not just chemists, this is true of any organisation, well, not any, but many more organisations, that there is immediately a bunker mentality. Put your tin hats on, get your head down, hope that whatever's flying around doesn't affect you. And I think that's often true of university scientists or scientists affiliated with bodies like the Royal Society of Chemistry, because it's like, well, it's not really my problem. That's that company over there. They're the one having their name blackened by whatever disaster is going on. Why should I get involved in talking about what this actually means? Well, the trouble is that bunker mentality, I think, is reinforced by the perception that people are automatically going to assume that as a chemist you're a bad person, you're creating polluting, horrible molecules and so on. But as we've seen, that's not the case. People are willing to listen and are receptive to ideas about chemistry. So I hope this encourages people, chemists, to get out of their bunker when there are bad things about chemistry in the news as well as good things.
It's a question of trust as well. You're only talking about what you think are the great things and the good things that are happening, and then everyone clams up and goes quiet when something goes wrong. the public will want to know why. Why aren't we hearing about what has happened? Why don't you want to talk about this? And then if you're trying to build up levels of trust, then that's only going to set you back. So absolutely, I think we should try and explain when things don't go the way that perhaps we wanted them to.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry at the back.
Thank you. Ben Valsler, Chemistry World. We've mentioned the fact that most people's access points, their touch points with chemistry is your local and national media. It's newspapers, it's television news. Chemists obviously have a vested interest in helping people to engage with chemistry. The proprietors of those newspapers and television programs don't. So what can we do to encourage them to put more chemistry on, to open up to chemistry stories?
So you seem to have a particular passion for engaging people with chemistry.
Yeah, I have to say, actually, in my experience, a lot of chemists don't feel confident in engaging with the media a lot of the time. So I think it's perhaps building our confidence to approach them as well. If they don't know that we exist, how do they know to approach us? There are loads of schemes going on at the moment to try and give people confidence, train them up into engaging with the media. So hopefully, lots and lots of RSC members will feel that that's something that they should contribute to as well and can contribute to as well. It doesn't just have to be the usual faces. It should really be everyone sharing their thoughts on things.
Okay.
In a way, I would say that chemists, if a chemist says, how can I get to talk about chemistry in my local newspaper? In a way, it's not a problem that they have to consider on their own. They probably work in an institution like a university that has a trained professional, a press officer, who will help them to do that. So every chemist working in an institution should know who their press officer is, hopefully be cultivating a relationship with them. They should make themselves known to the communications officer at the Royal Society of Chemistry. Say, I am willing to do this, I want to do this, how do we do this together? It's not the lone chemist that has to come up with the idea for how this is going to all play out in the media on their own. There's a support network, and I think all too few scientists take advantage of that.
Some of the language points, I think, that come from our research would really help in the individual interaction. So if we're talking about chemicals, it may be that the question that is asked of a chemist when they're asked to comment on an issue, they give an answer that doesn't quite match. And if we're beginning to talk more about chemicals as the way that it's commonly used rather than the scientific specific recommendation, then it could be that we as chemists can be giving more useful answers to questions about the story that are more likely to be used, more likely to be brought into stories and reporting, and bring the sort of the view of a chemist as someone who we can talk to through the media into a more accessible light, rather than someone who hides behind jargon, like Stu was saying, actually.
Okay. Thank you, John. Is there someone at the back there? Oh, it's Twitter. Hello, Twitter.
Twitter here in the flesh. No, we've quite a number of questions from Twitter coming through. First one we have is from Gareth. He says, what is chemistry's place outside of the drug development area? Does anyone care to answer that? A little further on with the question, just a little bit about the methods of the research, please. Kate would like to know that when people had the difference between chemists and pharmacists teased out from them, did their feelings towards them change? And David would like to know about the survey questions. How leading were they? If so many people knew little and yet still had opinions, how did that sort of work out between chemistry and pharmacy? We've got about 3 more. I don't know if you want to take those first, or...
Let's start with those. Okay. So the point about chemistry's place outside of drugs development, because, I mean, one of the clear associations that we found in the research was with medicine and developing drugs, but clearly it's a much broader field than that.
So I see a lot of research in what I do. It's certainly not all about making drugs and developing drugs. There is a lot of chemistry that goes into that, but there's also topics such as energy and developing new solar cells or new methods of harnessing solar energy. Then there's also materials and environmental remediation, storing pollutants and treating them to make them not so dangerous anymore, cleaning up water. it all goes to the environment and human health, but also materials just making our everyday lives better. You often hear about the physics of the iPhone, but there's a lot of chemistry in an iPhone too. There's an awful lot in there, and I think it was Mark Lorch at Hull has this wonderful smartphone case that shows you all the chemistry that's in an iPhone. So it certainly isn't all medicines. There's lots of it almost impacts everything in your daily lives. But energy and materials are two very, very big areas.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. And a couple of questions about the research method. It's probably safest to pass you over to Emily for the question about chemists versus pharmacists.
Yes. So there was actually something quite interesting that came out of the survey and the qualitative workshops around the pharmacist and the chemist question. So this question, when I talk about a chemist, what comes to mind? That was an open question, and people were allowed to just say anything they wanted, and then we coded them together and grouped them thematically. And then when we asked questions about the attributes of a chemist, we actually read out to people in the survey a description of a chemist. So a chemist is not just a pharmacist, but I can't remember the exact quote, but it lists different industries that a chemist might work in, and then gave them that before they asked attributes of the chemist. One of the challenges, I guess, with this is the strength of that association for some people that we saw in the qualitative workshop. So we would talk about, what do you think a chemist is? Who do you think a chemist is? And get all of that data. Then we tell them a bit more about chemists, and then we talk about them, and we would reveal a bit more about how people felt in relation to chemists. And that's where we started to get all of this sort of inferiority, all of the feelings of insecurity. And I think that's really, we've written about this in the report, but that's really showing that there are just that sense of inferiority is felt in relation to chemistry. And in relation to that discipline, and just not feeling confident. Are those both questions?
Thanks, Emily. I should just point out that there is obviously a published report which details the full research methodology. So if you have any technical questions about what we went ahead and did, I'm sure you can find the answers in there. So that's, with regards to survey questions being leading, I mean, I think I should probably sit here and say that we never ask leading questions in surveys, but the details of that will all be in the report.
Andy from BAS. Was interested to see this in the context of being a baseline study. And it's covered the ground that you might cover if you were trying to start from scratch. Is this going to be repeated? If so, how regularly? And if so, are you going to tackle some of the more difficult issues, such as GM or pesticides or any of the other areas where the public has more mixed views on the popularity of the consequences of chemistry?
That's definitely a question for John.
I think I agree. It's a fantastic baseline. It gives us such a good sort of solid grounding on the beginnings of lots of people's thoughts about chemistry. And there's lots of other research out there, especially through things like the Eurobarometer and things, about specific areas of concern for the public. So I would love to be able to use this research in the future as a baseline and maybe pick up on specific issues as they arise, maybe test some of the more general things again to see if we're having an impact as a community, if we're shifting those stereotypes, if we're raising the positivity. But yes, I think it'd be a wonderful baseline to start from and to measure more specifically in the future.
Okay, thanks, John.
Hi, I'm Gail Cardew from the Royal Institution. Like Mark on the end, I was really struck by the disparity between the public attitudes towards chemistry and the chemists' attitudes towards the public. And we often in our community think about training scientists to communicate as opposed to really training scientists in their understanding of the public. So I was wondering what plans that the Royal Society of Chemistry might have to address not just the communication skills of scientists to talk to the public or to the media, but actually basic knowledge about public understanding of chemistry.
Sorry, it's probably unfair to pass this John. But could I just clarify, do you mean about general communication skills for scientists, like training in general communication skills?
No, I'm saying that's what we usually offer scientists, but what we don't offer are, say, seminars, opportunities to really delve into and understand more about what the public is concerned about, excited about. But most scientists don't have the opportunity to really appreciate the complexity and the nuances that the public have about their attitudes towards science. Sure. We don't offer training in that. We instead offer lots of training on communication skills.
Sure, thanks. So I would say that this, I can speak for the chemistry community, as it were, or the Royal Society of Chemistry rather than scientists more broadly, but certainly this research and the outputs that we're going to be creating from it, so things like a communications toolkit for scientists, we're integrating all of this stuff into all the support we already offer the chemistry community, and we're having one of our first outreach conferences just at the end of the week, where a lot of people are going to be talking about not just the general, how do you communicate, but diving into the research, diving into the results, the specifics about what is it about chemistry that people find difficult, and how can you specifically develop targeted outreach activities or conversation starters to be able to hit home there. So we are definitely going to be, from a chemistry perspective at the very least, basing so much of how we skill up chemists to talk, not just on the very general level, although I think actually the general level is still very much required, but more deep understanding of the chemistry-specific issues. And this research gives us a great baseline for the kind of the very top-level stuff about, can you even get past the first line of a conversation where you say, I'm a chemist, and someone might go, oh, I don't know what that means. That's not necessarily a communications skill thing. It could be that you just need that jolt to remind yourself, I need to explain what that means. And that kind of specific stuff we will be, certainly as an organisation, we do offer and will be offering a huge amount of support for our community, whether that's materials that will be available online or training sessions or mentoring or whatever. But we'll be doing a huge amount to support them in those very specific areas.
Thanks, John.
Hi, I'm Ethan Greenwood from the Wellcome Trust.
You just need to wait for a microphone.
Oh, sorry. Ethan Greenwood from the Wellcome Trust.
Thanks.
If I could just pick on something interesting that you said, Catherine, about the fact that scientists are trusted more than people in other professions, perhaps not unsurprisingly journalists, politicians, etc. But when we look at some of those, I work on the Wellcome Trust Monitor, we ask those kind of questions and also the public attitude science questions. When people are asked about why they trust scientists, there's this increasing theme of a kind of a blind trust, that people say, we have no reason but to trust, and that people can't explain, why it is that they actually kind of trust scientists. And that made me kind of also question about, does your survey look at, does it ask people about their science backgrounds and qualifications, and presumably those people are more kind of informed in their understanding that perhaps the reason why people express neutral views is quite obviously that a lack of knowledge, a lack of specific subject knowledge.
So I think that's a really interesting area, actually. This why do the public trust scientists, including chemists, as much as they do? And I think I don't have the data at my fingertips to really kind of give you a thought-through answer, but my instinct is that it's about the perceived purity of motivation of scientists. So scientists are working in the kind of public for the good of the globe, for the good of humanity, and it's something around the purity of those motivations compared to perhaps the perceived motivations of politicians, or perhaps, I'm aware there's quite a number of journalists in the room, so I need to pick my words carefully here, but perhaps the perceived motivations of journalists among the public. I think that perhaps the public's not able to point to the mechanisms that scientists would say that warrant the trust, so things like peer review or transparency or whatever, these various mechanisms that scientists use. The public isn't necessarily aware of what those mechanisms are, but they have a sense that there are mechanisms in place to sort of protect science and to protect against rogue scientists. And I think rogue scientists might be an example of what Steve was referring to earlier. When things go wrong, we need to be really clear about this is an example of somebody who's acting beyond the boundaries of what might be considered scientific practice, and defend the practice of science more vehemently.
There was something interesting in the report, actually, that kept coming back, and it was about when money got involved and when it was industry and chemical industry. There's a great quote in there, which, if you don't mind me quoting from the report. So, chemists don't make these decisions. It's all about the money. Chemists are the pawns. And it was all about corporations making decisions and not the chemists. So I think at least the respondents to the survey thought it wasn't the actual people doing the science. It was then the evil conglomerates doing their bad thing. And so the scientists weren't getting the blame. It was the people who were making the money who apparently are not the scientists.
Yeah. That's very true, and having run some of the workshops, I can attest to that, definitely. I think in terms of what the research showed in terms of education and attitudes to science versus their engagement with chemistry, you'd have to look back at the report for that. But there was certainly a positive connection between educational attainment and engagement with chemistry, as you might expect. Whether that was actually related to education in the sciences, I think you need to check the report to find that. More from Twitter. Oh, sorry. Yes.
On a chemistry-specific note for the trust thing, it ties up with some of the other findings, I think, because if 90% or whatever of people may assume instantly that a chemist is someone who works as a pharmacist, then where is that trust coming from? So if someone positions themselves as a chemist in sort of an expert role, then do we actually have to think that maybe 90% of people are thinking, why is a pharmacist commenting on the chemistry of solar fuels? And then again, the sort of the roots of the trust is something that I'd be really interested to delve into a bit more, and cross-reference with other surveys. And we've looked a lot at all the various kind of work that's gone into broader science issues and tried to, where possible and appropriate, kind of map the different findings. And it's, the trust one, I think, is one that comes up time and time again. It'll be really interesting to find out more as our community get to grips with using these findings and understanding more about communication, to kind of hear the feedback that we get as well about trust and about assumed trust.
I think we had some more from Twitter.
Thank you. Yeah, we've quite a lot of questions relating to educating young chemists to communicate, whether it's whether communication should be obligatory in all chemistry courses, or even going so far as to suggest should grant funding be based heavily on young chemists' ability to communicate. A whole range of questions coming through, but those are sort of two strong themes. We also have a lot of questions coming through. James and Debbie have both asked about how some of this research might relate to the US, how US crossover things can happen, and in particular, how has Breaking Bad altered perceptions, if at all?
Well, just to take that last point, yes, Walter White certainly has an influence on people's minds, as does Doc Brown from Back to the Future, we discovered. But actually, I think the general associations that people had, as Emily showed in the presentation, were more with their school teacher than with any particular sort of stereotypical scientist, I think. Should we just take the point on whether it should be obligatory to encourage and help young chemists to communicate? Mark?
In a word, yes. I think that there should be much broader career training as part of PhD programs anyway, and I think a core part of that should be communication. I just think there's no question about that at all, because whatever job trainee chemists, PhD chemists are trainee chemists, whatever job they go into afterwards, they're going to need to talk to people from a range of different backgrounds, and yet, you know, they get all too little quality training in how to do that. So I certainly think that's essential. The question about tying it to grant funding, I mean, a lot of grants have a requirement, don't they, for some degree, some level of outreach activity.
I think for some it's an afterthought.
But it is an afterthought for a lot. That's a more difficult question to pin down, how strongly that should be connected. But I certainly think on the training side, there should be more training for all PhD scientists in communication.
And
think there's a huge appetite for it as well. I think that at the British Science Association, we get loads of scientists saying we'd like to do more science communication, we'd like to do more public engagement. What can we get involved with? So there's a real pool of interested scientists out there, I think.
What I would say there is that, I mean, Sir Mark Walpole, I think it was, famously said science isn't finished until it's communicated. And I do agree with that, but at the same time, I don't think you would necessarily want everybody to be facing the public. I think they need to have an input in what is being communicated with the public, and we need to increase dialogue with the public. But I wouldn't necessarily say everybody needs to be trained up to do it. I would agree, but they may not necessarily be the face that we want communicating that to certain groups of people, because it does take a lot of skill and training for, say, a professor to communicate science to a primary school group audience. You know, that's really tricky and can actually be negative. So to have an input would be great, yes. I also think something you were saying about this sort of attachment to grant funding, yes, it does exist, but as Stuart says, it's often an afterthought. So I think perhaps raising the value of communicating that science with the public certainly for some research institutions would be really useful.
We've probably got time for just a couple more questions. So.
Thank you. James Piercy from Science Made Simple. Just to pick up on that last point, really, I've been involved for a number of years now in the doctoral training centre at University of Bath, working with PhD students in sustainable chemistry, and it is a compulsory part of their doctoral programme to be involved in engagement training, and some of it will be talking in public and some of it will be writing, and we cover the whole gamut, but we always start by doing this stuff. And I'd kind of really link back to what Mark and Gail mentioned, really. You know, the striking thing about these figures is that disparity between what the public actually think and what the chemists think they think. And that's the lesson that needs to be learned. You know, being familiar with some of the Wellcome Monitor stuff and the past surveys that have passed, this isn't hugely surprising reading, actually. It's pretty much in line with what we'd expect. But what is shocking is that difference. So, without wanting to sound too harsh, get your own house in order before you go out and shout at the public about it. Shout at your own members and tell them, look, they love you. Don't be afraid. They like you. You're lovely people. And get out there and then go from that basis, and it will be much easier, much easier.
Thanks, James. Do we have another point at the... Yeah? Oh, the question at the front here.
Johanna Kinjovich, Institute of Physics. Who is the public? I'm just interested, was there any sort of segmentation in the study beyond gender? Because at least in physics, we have enormous disparity across socioeconomic lines, racial, ethnic lines, that kind of thing. I'm just wondering whether any of that figured in this work.
I've been told to talk about this. Hooray! So my name's Dom MacDonald. I work for the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm the programme manager for Outreach. So our wonderful colleagues at TNS, I'm very well prepared for this. Our wonderful colleagues at TNS did some audience segmentation for us. So there are 5 segments that they've identified, one of which is the one that we would recognise as being the group which is highly engaged with the sciences, and you know that comes to most of the events that we run, and Emily will have the figures, I'm sure, on how big each of these sectors is. That what I remember is that they're all quite similar in size, so it's sort of 20%-ish across each one. So there's one which is which we would totally recognise as being the people who come to our stuff. There are then 4 which differ somewhat in different aspects of their attitudes. Some who are just completely neutral and frankly neither know nor care. Some who are suspicious about, relatively receptive but suspicious about aspects of the chemical sciences, and so on. So there's a kind of there's an interesting segmentation that's been done, and the question of how we then fold that segmentation into our ongoing activities is one that we are, thank you, Robert, one that we are currently worrying about, if you like. So it gives us an enormously rich body of knowledge to start with, but it's obviously it has parallels with the public attitudes to science stuff. It doesn't map directly onto that. And so exactly what we're going to do with that, I think, is still a work in progress. I hope that's a useful answer.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for one more? Do we have one more? Oh, thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam from Chemistry World. I think this is going to be massively useful for our chemistry agenda. I'm just interested, what do we think the public's chemistry agenda is?
Very nice question. Who would like to take it?
I would start with saying, do they have one? And maybe the research, one of the things it's showing us is that actually there is no public chemistry agenda, and that we have this massive opportunity to set it ourselves as a community, which is a really exciting prospect from a communications point of view. We've got all this blank space and we can write whatever we want there. It's a really powerful opportunity for chemists.
Yeah, I have to say that was one of my main impressions from the research. There is a blank canvas out there, and I think the challenge is that a blank canvas is a wonderful thing to work with, but if you don't fill it, then something else will. And hence the problem, if you like, of stereotypes and other sort of automatic assumptions that people have creep in if you can't find a way of filling that canvas yourselves. Are we? Okay. I think we have reached the end of our time. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel before I ask Robert to come back and close things for us. But thank you for all your thoughts and contributions to Catherine, Suze, and John, and Stuart, and Mark. Thank you to Emily for presenting to us so ably. So I'd just like to welcome Robert Parker back to say a few closing words.
Thanks. Perhaps I should reintroduce myself. I'm a scientist working in chemistry. I was very interested this morning when I was having my breakfast. I was looking through The Guardian, and there was actually an article on science this morning, thankfully. It was some research from Queen's University of Belfast on solar doses and using wristbands with inks and photocatalysts in them. It's very interesting. I thought they'd been reading our report already because it started off saying this work was done by scientists at Queen's Belfast. Then lower down it said they were scientists working in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering. And I thought, they've got it fixed already. They already know what they've got to say. But anyway, thank you everyone for contributing this afternoon to what's been a very interesting discussion. Please do read the full details of the report where you'll find a lot more information. Thanks very much to the speakers and to the panel, and for everyone who's been watching and keeping the conversation going online, as well as people from all around the UK. We've had people watching from Spain, Belgium, Philippines, South Africa and the Netherlands. So that's great that we've been able to engage lots of people around. We've touched on many of the interesting things that have come out of the research. Among the things that interested me the most was how we get a different proxy for what chemists are out into the community. And when you see, someone actually raised the question earlier about how important the tabloid media are in the public's perception about chemistry. The tabloid media, we find it very difficult to get anything into the media that isn't about health science or the things that people feel chemists do already. So actually, I suspect that's similar for physics and biology, actually. For physics, people are quite happy to talk about stars, but they're not that interested in fluid mechanics, perhaps. Or with biology, they like animals, but are they really interested in physiology? I don't know. Perhaps they're not. So we do have, however we look at it, we're up against things that we find exciting that not everybody shares the love for. So I think we've got some challenges there still. Our views of public opinion can be too negative, we've learnt that, and thanks to this research we can start thinking about public opinion in a more evidence-based way. But the discussion's going to continue online. Please keep it going. Follow #ChemPerceptions on Twitter. There'll be plenty of opportunities to talk more about this research and to see what we're going to be doing with it. So please get in touch with your comments and questions. The contacts and materials are all available now, including the full report. And they'll be on our website, rsc.li/PAC. So thank you all very much for taking part.